All of the writing that you do can be broken into one of four categories. Sort of. There's a whole bunch of nuance and overlap and gatyas, just like anything else with writing, but let's see how this goes. If you've been a regular viewer of the channel, you've heard me talk about these four different buckets of prose before. I use this as a way to sort of classify and think about writing. It's about breaking the different parts of prose into different purposes, which allows you to better achieve those purposes. There are other people who have broken this down in other ways. This is just the way I do it. I'm not saying that my method is better or worse than anybody else's. But basically, the four parts of prose, as I break them down, are action or narrative, description, dialogue or other dialogue like things, and exposition. Now, there's all sorts of overlap between these four areas. There's all kinds of writing that could be classified in two or more of these categories. And that's not really the purpose of this breakdown. It's not to break all of your writing into four different categories. It's more so to understand the four broad things that prose needs to accomplish and the different ways that you accomplish those things. Today, we're going to talk about action or narrative, which is the first of the four, and in the coming weeks, I'll be doing videos on the other three. Unless this video performs really poorly, because at the end of the day, I am just a greedy slave to the whims of the YouTube algorithm, and my primary goal here is the extraction of wealth, not actually making meaningful content. All right, so let's talk about action. Action is any part of the prose that describes action. So movement, a change of state, a character doing something, a step forward, anything that is sort of related to progress or time gets communicated through action in your prose. This could be a character walking through a doorway, a character drawing a sword, a stew pot boiling over, a plane taking off. Anything that happens in your story, anything with a verb, arguably, is action. There are some edge cases here that spill into other categories. An elf sitting on a boulder is arguably a description of a scene, but sitting is a verb, so it's also technically an action. You run into this with things like the sun shining, a bell ringing. Those are descriptions and also actions. Where action happens and the cadence of those actions, how you separate those actions between the other parts of prose, will affect the pacing of your story. This is why action is so important. Every time you have a sentence that can be classified as describing an action, you're moving the story forward a little bit. All of your plot, all of your arcs, everything that happens through the course of the story, they move through the different stages by having action happen. Action is very tightly coupled with description. Description is the second bucket of prose that we'll talk about later, but to briefly describe description, description is how you convey what something or someone looks, sounds, and feels like to the reader. It's distinct from action because it's not something happening, it's what something looks like, or smells like, or tastes like, or feels like. A character's footsteps echoing off the cold marble tiles as they cross the room is a mix of description and action. You'll often see these two together in the same sentences. The description adds some color to the action and lets the reader understand what things look and sound like. This is important because the mixture of action and description is really how you control the pace of your story. You can make an action take longer, you can stretch it out over a longer period of time by adding more description to it. Description naturally slows down action. One of the differentiating factors of pure description is that it's static. Nothing changes. When you describe the weight of the sword in the character's hand and the intricate gold leaf emblem embossed on the hilt and the lethally sharp mirror-like polish on the blade, there's no movement, there's no progress. You are basically pausing the story to convey that description. You're slowing everything down. There's no action happening as you describe this. You're taking a little bit more time to paint a more accurate picture in the reader's mind. That's not a bad or a good thing. That pausing is something you do or don't do depending on the needs of the story at that moment. Again, this mixture of action and description is how you can control the pace of your story. When you begin to add action to a description, when stuff starts changing, that's when the story starts moving again. The way you make a moment take longer, the way you pause to build up tension and suspense before a big moment, is often by adding more description and spacing out the action. Think about a character doing something like turning a doorknob and stepping into a room. You can start and finish that action in one sentence. You can make it happen really quick, or you can make it last for 50 pages. To do that, you really need to lean into a lot of description, describing how the knob feels in the character's hand, describing the peeling paint on the surface of the door, the sound of the hinges as they grind into motion, the sensation of the character's heart beating against their chest, the musty smell of the long unentered room on the other side. Most of that description is static. It's in the moment because we're trying to stretch that moment out. We're slowing things down, delaying getting to the next action in order to build up tension or suspense. You, as a writer, have complete control over time. You can pass a millennium in a sentence, or you can make the next 3 seconds take 75 pages. The way you control time is through mixtures of description, which tends to be static and slows things down, and action, which is naturally dynamic and implies change and time passing. There are other things that can slow down action, for instance, exposition if you dump a bunch of history stuff in between actions. Character thoughts and rumination can also slow down action, although thoughts are sort of an action if you think about it, as they can make things change within the character by what they think, but we'll talk about those in a later video. So how do you write good action? Action is bad when there's too much of it at the expense of other parts of the prose. When you aren't pausing for description or dialogue or even exposition and all you have is actions happening one after the other, that gets kind of difficult. He opened the door and stepped inside. He crossed the living room to the stairwell and started up the steps to the second floor. He stopped at the first door on the right, took hold of the knob, and opened the door. He stepped inside the room. Lots of action that's put together feels kind of plodding. You get this weird sort of rhythm. It's much better to intersperse some description or other things like dialogue within a series of actions. He opened the door, the warm heat of the fireplace blasting out into the cold morning. Hardwood floors squeaked under his boots as he crossed the living room, stepping past the bloodstains on the area rug. "I should have cleaned those up last night," he muttered as he started up the stairs. Description will add some color to your actions. It slows things down at specific moments, as we talked about before, and it can convey some interesting questions that the actions might not. It makes the reader feel more immersed because they have a better understanding of what's happening as the action's happening. It's a combination of description and action that make that second passage at least a little bit better than the first passage. Writing good action is often a balance between having enough description that the rhythm of the action feels good and that the reader can picture what's happening around the actions. So making sure you have a balance between description and action is one of the better ways to write better action. There's more technical things as well. Usually action is better written in the active voice. Passive voice is not the novel ruining menace that people make it out to be, but generally active voice is better most of the time, so that's mostly what you should use. You can use passive voice, but probably not all the time. I mentioned earlier that action is centered around the verb. Verbs are literally words used to describe actions. That's what they do. You have a lot of choice in the verbs that you use, and the verb can really change how an action comes across to the reader. He staggered across the room. He limped across the room. He hopped across the room. He glided across the room. He swaggered across the room. He crept across the room. All of those are action sentences that describe the same action, But different verbs paint a very different picture. The reader is going to understand different things about that action based on the verbs that you choose. I think of all the things with writing good action, picking good, strong verbs is the most important thing. Where an action falls on the abstract to concrete spectrum also matters. Concrete actions take longer to get across, but they give you more control over how the reader pictures what's going on. Saying that the mill closed and the town slipped into economic troubles is very abstract. Those are very high level ideas. Saying that the mill gates were shuttered and the unemployed townsfolk left their homes for greener pastures is a little bit more concrete. It gets down into the details of what's happening, but you'll notice it takes more actions to describe, and making that even more concrete would require even more actions and probably a bit of description mixed in as well. We keep sort of coming back to this action description balance, but as you make an action more concrete, you'll notice a bit more description sort of leaks into it. And I think if you get really, really concrete with how you're describing actions, it almost seems like more of a description than an action. Which is really kind of the whole point of my 4 parts of prose system. It isn't about classifying one line as one part or another, it's more about the interaction between the different parts and how those interactions create different effects in your writing. Speaking of effects on your writing, I hope this video had an effect, hopefully a good one, on your writing. Maybe you spat coffee onto your manuscript at all my dryly humorous quips. Anyway, as I mentioned, we will be exploring the other 3 parts of prose in upcoming videos, so make sure you don't miss those. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.